Good evening and welcome to RAND. I am Krishna Kumar, the Director of RAND Labor and Population. We are recording tonight's program, so if you like what you hear, please be sure to share the podcast with your friends and colleagues. You can find the events at RAND podcast series on rand.org or through iTunes. For those of you who are visiting RAND for the first time, I'd like to begin by telling you a little bit about RAND. RAND is a nonprofit, nonpartisan research institution. Our mission is to help improve policy and decision-making through scientifically rigorous research and analysis. We have 9 offices around the world and conduct work across a broad range of areas from labor and population, health, education, safety and justice, and so on. Our Santa Monica campus is also home to the Pardee Rand Graduate School with nearly 100 students and over 200 faculty members. The school is a hub of innovation that works to develop the next generation of policymakers. Tonight's program is being co-hosted with the Milken Institute, and we're very pleased to have them as associates here in collaboration with RAND. This is our second partnering event with Milken in the past few weeks, and it's been a pleasure to work with them. RAND is pleased to offer public programs like this to help inform the public dialogue on critical policy issues. These programs are possible in part due to the generosity of members of the RAND Policy Circle who help us bring the contents of our work to the people who can change minds and change policies. I'd like to thank the policy members who are with us this evening. Thank you for your support. It helps RAND make a difference and helps us to share our research with you. I'd now like to introduce our speakers. Their biographies are in the program on your chair, and please come on the stage as I begin each introduction. Professor Edmund Phelps is the 2006 Nobel laureate in economics. And he was honored for his work on macroeconomic and in particular monetary policy. Having taught hundreds of students why in the long run the Phillips curve has to be vertical, it is a personal privilege for me to be able to introduce Professor Phelps to you all. He's the director of the Center on Capitalism and Society at Columbia University, as well as the dean of the new Wadu Business School in Fuzhou, China. He began his career as an economist at the RAND Corporation. His newest book is Mass Flourishing: How Grassroots Innovation Created Jobs, Challenge, and Change, in which he argues that modern values underlying the modern economy are under threat by a resurgence of traditional corporatist values that put the community and state over the individual. In the book, which will be on sale after the program outside this room, Dr. Phelps makes a sweeping new argument about what makes nations prosper and why the sources of that prosperity are under threat today. Dr. Phelps will be available to sign his book, which, as I mentioned before, will be on sale after this program concludes. Our moderator tonight is Dr. Peter Passell, the editor of the Milken Institute Review, the Institute's economic quarterly. He joined the Institute as a senior fellow after 8 years as an economics columnist for the New York Times. He previously served as on the Times editorial board and was an assistant professor also at Columbia University's Graduate Department of Economics. Peter, we look forward to the discussion. Thank you both.
Well, thank you. Let me follow up with just one thought about, before I give the floor rightfully to Ned, let me follow up with one thought. Ned won the Nobel Prize in 2006, and unlike most Nobel Prizes in economics, this one's understandable. And I thought I would, I thought since many of you aren't economists, I would give you the 30-second version so you actually know what some Nobel Prize economist actually did. He did many things, but the thing that he's most notable for was one great insight. Before Ned thought about this problem, it was widely assumed that there was a simple, stable trade-off between unemployment and inflation. If you wanted lower unemployment, you paid a price and a little bit more inflation. Or if you wanted less inflation, you paid the price and accepted a little bit more unemployment. Ned's great insight was there is no stable relationship. That once you hit the bottom, near the bottom, at some institutional level of unemployment, all you're doing is delaying the day of the inflation taking off. Essentially, this was very, very bad news for Keynesians. At a time when Keynesianism was really at its peak in influence. Now, Ned is not an anti-Keynesian, but that's an entirely other story, and that's not what we're here to talk about. We're going to talk about mass flourishing, which is Ned's new book, and I'm going to give him a few minutes to give you the whole word so you don't have to buy the book later. Okay? Ned, please.
Yeah, thank you. I'm very grateful to Rand Corporation and the Milken Institute for arranging this opportunity to speak about my book, Mass Flourishing. And thanks to Peter, too, for taking his time out to do this. The book is about the modern economies, which is what I call them, that sprouted up early in the 19th century, first in Britain and America, later in Germany and France, and remained fully well-functioning until various times in the middle of the 20th century. The wonder of these economies was not high wages, as if the workers had discovered fertile land or something like that. The wonder was the widespread prosperity. Now, I distinguish between material prosperity and non-material prosperity, but I think it's also important to distinguish between classical prosperity and modern prosperity. Under classical prosperity, the market forces are driving up wage rates, for example, and a worker doesn't have to do a thing. He just rides the rising tide. You could say he's prospering, but I think that'd be a little bit misleading because it has nothing to do with him. It's just wages are going up. The other kind of prosperity is modern prosperity. There are gains in earning power from new insights, and there are gains in satisfaction from new insights and from creating things. And for me, this is succeeding at the individual level, or what I will call prospering. Now, what was behind this? And this had never been seen in any large numbers before. What was behind this? I argue that it was innovation. Large numbers of people were tinkering and experimenting and creating innovations. Now, it's very important to note that over broad parts of the country, it's believed that innovation is basically a matter of science. Scientists make discoveries, entrepreneurs make the commercial applications. I argue that's not the way it was. First of all, we're not enough scientists to cause this explosion of innovation between 1815 and 1940 or 1960. So you couldn't possibly say that scientists' discoveries were doing all that, and science was weak in the early decades of the 19th century anyway. You had to say that these modern economies possess their own dynamism, their own desire, and their own capacity, and the scope to innovate. And just like an individual has a capacity to create something new. So so I call this indigenous innovation rather than the other kind that's some more classical. Was this good? Well, you betcha. There were fantastic material gains. Wages were rising all the time. In the old days, they went up for a while and they went down. Now they're just straight up. And of course, there were phenomenal improvements in health and nutrition and disease and all that. But I'm fascinated by the material benefits. People were doing different things in the workplace from what they'd ever done before. And this completely changed the experience of life. And I argue in the fun chapter that Beethoven and Strauss and Richard Strauss, not Johann, and some other composers, and also painters and writers of fiction were onto that. They felt that. They were expressing some of that in their writing and in their depiction of individual life. Now, at the end of this Act 1, some really bad news happened, and that is that there was a severe reaction against these modern economies, or even the specter that one of these modern economies might be coming our way, as in the case of Italy. And what happened was that a number of intellectually influential and politically astute people got together and started creating a counter-economy, which I call corporatism. That's the name that Mussolini used also, corporativismo to be more accurate. And basically this economy is based on a whole different set of values. I'm about ready to stop now. The modern economies were based, I argue, on modern values. Modern values like thinking for yourself, and let's see if I can get that on the screen. Yes, thinking for yourself and earning for yourself, and then also those are values that are connected with individualism, and then there are values that are connected with vitalism, the quest for exploration, that kind of thing. And then there are also a set of values that I think have to do with the expression of the person. The person does this to sort of find out who he or she is, or does it for the sake of personal growth. And so these were the modern values. They came out of what Jacques Barzun called the modern era, which ran from around 1490 to around 1940. Now, the corporatist economies were based upon traditional values: patriotism, family, not staying with the group, conformism, all that. So you had quite a clash here, and at the end of the 1930s and with World War II, it looked like, well, that's the end of that. Italy and Germany and France will not go on any longer, not go on with these corporatist economies. And they did eliminate some of the trappings, but it seems to me that fundamentally they retained an awful lot of the flavor of the corporatist economies. And then maybe I should stop here, Peter.
Okay. Let me actually, this gives me an opportunity to force you to sharpen something here, because I think it's a very radical idea what you're offering here, though it may not have sounded so radically when you said it. If I get this straight, in the long run, the health of an economic culture doesn't depend on what you learned in Econ 101. It doesn't depend on incentives to work or save. It doesn't depend on the efficiency of markets. It doesn't depend on the efficacy of macroeconomic policy. Or it doesn't even depend on the quality of education, a big one these days. What it depends upon is pretty much society's openness to innovation. Now, that's pretty radical, isn't it?
And society's desire to innovate, the welling urge inside people to innovate, to explore. That's where the modern values.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
How do you? It's interesting you say this, though. I mean, in a way, you're saying that era has ended. It's kind of closed down under a corporatist culture, which essentially tends to reduce incentives to innovate. It undermines modern values, as you'd put it. Yet this is the era of the Rand Corporation, not let alone Silicon Valley. America, in many ways, is still considered the envy of the world in terms of its openness to ideas at the business level, at least. How does this gel with what you're saying?
Okay. Well, we're certainly we Americans are more imbued with these modern values than any other nation in the world. I think it's safe to say, and I think that among Western nations, I think the American economy is still more innovative in the aggregate, but it's not nearly as innovative as it was before. I like to trot out a calculation, namely that between 1922 and 1972, that part of the growth of output per man-hour not explained by the growth of capital per man-hour. We used to call it the residual when you and I were in graduate school. That residual was running at around 2% per annum from 1922 to 1972.
So 2% points of growth were related to innovation.
So 2 points, 2 percentage points were coming from this indigenous innovation. Some other stuff too, but on average that goes away. I mean, those are ephemeral things that are messing up the data, but they go away. Then, beginning in the late 70s, the number drops to around 1%. So we're still innovative. 1% means you double productivity in 72 years. But 72 years is a long time. And you could be forgiven for not noticing much innovation at 1% per annum. And and the other thing to have to say is, so there is still innovation in America, but I think we're just not as innovative. Secondly, I mean, we're not as innovative in the aggregate. I think there's been a huge decline of innovation in the heartland of America, in the big old established industries dominated by large established companies. But out here in California, with all your wonderful garage innovators and all the ferment and the music business and the film industry and everything, you've been spared, or you've managed to counter these trends. But nevertheless, I think the country as a whole is in real trouble.
As I recall, we won World War II. Yet the birth of corporatism was in German and Italian fascism, the organization of the economy through the state and through large corporations. What happened here? Why did we lose our mojo?
Well, when I first started thinking about that question, the obvious hypothesis, we've lost our modern values. But then I realized that, first of all, I wouldn't know how to be able to establish that by looking at data, because we don't have long time series on household attitudes that could be, from which we could perhaps draw some inferences about a decline of modern values. But I think that we do see lots of cultural evidence that's about what Americans say, what politicians say, what commentators say, and it seems to me that in America now it's very common to hear, well, for one thing, I think that there's a tremendous downgrading of creativity. I remember reading a book review of a new book about Edwin Hubble, the telescope guy, and it presented him, and the book reviewer, more than the book itself, I think, but the book reviewer especially just reviled Hubble. Well, a few months went by, and then I read a book review about a biography of Edward Hopper, the great painter. Same thing. It was all about allegations of misbehavior, of everything, and nothing about the fabulous creativity. And I got another one or two examples, but I was struck. Last week there was another one, Robert Frost. There's now a great debate between the daughter of a friend of mine who's taken on Joyce Carol Oates about Robert Frost. Now that's just one example of a big sea change in the way we talk about our ideals and our values. Another one was the Geraldine, the candidate for vice president.
They know, Ferrara.
Ferrara. She was saying that what the country is all about is you go to work, you do your work, and you get your and you play by the rules, and you get your share. And if something, I think the implication is, if something bad happens to your share, the government will come in and get
I'm
that
so glad you
share
raised this. Yes.
back up. And I thought, wow, that's amazing in a number of ways and a number of levels. For example, it seems to suggest that the worker goes to the company and collects the pay, and that's what pay is all about. Well, maybe in some sense, maybe that is a lot of what paychecks are all about. But the growth of a person's income has an awful lot to do with his initiative, his or her initiative, or imagination, creativity, insights, experience, all this stuff that is a part of an individual's makeup and a part of his or her contribution to society, and that's being totally
I think we're hitting a place here which I think we can get some audience anger going here if we try.
Oh, good.
Let me express it for them to start. I'm not angry, but I am struck by a point. Essentially, one could rephrase that and say that a lot of this problem is the rise of the welfare state, or the expectation of having a welfare state. Which, so in a way, you really do not like the result of modern liberalism.
I'm not a neoliberal. I'm not in favor of a smaller government. Of course, if I could, I would make a lot of spending cuts. But I would also make a lot of additions to spending. I think probably the federal government could do a better job with education if it spent some more money, for example. But I'm not a neoliberal, and I'm not against Social Security, medical insurance, social insurance for medicine, for medical care. Those things are fine, but I think what happens is that the idea kind of spreads that, well, why shouldn't everything be free? Not just the Medicare, but and I think a culture of entitlement is kind of fed by this, so that and also I think it's very bad for young people growing up if they see that their parents are heavily on public support. What kind of a role model is that? And also, if they're heavily on public support, maybe they're not so motivated to have a job, so they're not in the business sector, so they're not teaching their children anything about the business world and how it's, kind of interesting and might be rewarding to be in.
Yeah, I think you've dug a nice deep hole in this one. And we'll leave it to them to see if they want to fill it or not. Let me switch the topic just a little bit here. We've got this failing, essentially this failing modern economy, but there are lots of winners within this failing modern economy.
Yeah,
lots of winners, and those winners have learned that it's pretty easy to take control of things, and they make it easier and easier for themselves to control things. After one laments the death of this modern state, how do you take it back from the people who benefit so much from it?
Are you talking about the fact that the big corporations have become skilled at buying special interest legislation?
Sure.
And protecting and protecting themselves from the competition of upstarts?
Yes, in general, incumbents have gotten better and better at this,
this is a huge part of the inequality story, but it's also a huge part of the innovation story. Once the established corporations, the duopolists or the oligopolists that are dominating an industry, get a lot of carve-outs and get a lot of special tax deductions, then that makes it harder for startups to enter the industry and change things with new products and new methods that will drive down prices and everything. So the potential startup entrepreneurs don't innovate. They can't innovate, and the established corporations, which might have been doing some defensive innovation just to keep out startup entrepreneurs, to deter them, they don't have to innovate anymore because they've got the protections of the carve-outs and the tax deductions. So.
But are we finished? Is there any way to get it back?
And that's a very corporatist thing because under Mussolini, of course, there was a dialogue between the government and the big industries, and it wasn't as if the Mussolini had a vision for the whole economy and the corporations should shut up. Certainly the big corporate leaders had an influence on the government and got things from the government.
Last question that I will ask, and then we'll give the audience a shot at this. This is allegedly the age of the emerging economies, of China, of India, of Brazil. Some people would put Russia in that category. I don't know why, but they would. Are those economies succeeding because they're modern, more modern than us?
The short answer is no, but I'm beginning to think that China is proving to be better and better at innovation than I understood when I first started going to China quite a lot in 2010. I thought that all of China's technological progress was the result of what economists call technological transfers from America. In other words, copying. And I'd been in China for a year or two, and this view of mine was actually reinforced because some of my Chinese colleagues said, we here in China, we Chinese are afraid to stand out from the group. We're afraid to advance a different idea. So it's going to be generations before we can innovate like you Americans. Well, that's what they were telling me. But then later my handlers started sending me to factories for visits. And I discovered at 2 or 3 of those companies that, my gosh, not only are they very sophisticated, not only do they know everybody in the business around the world, but they also, many of them are thinking about innovation, and some of them are innovating on a small scale. But we have the whole secret of America's rapid innovation was that everybody was innovating. It was innovating down to the grassroots. And China, with its huge population, is a little bit like that, too. There are an awful lot of companies that are thinking about innovation, and some of them are beginning to do it. Now, we talked about numbers before. I got a frequent collaborator and former student of mine, Gilfie Zawega, to do some computations of this rate of innovation that we were talking about before in America, to do that calculation for China. Well, that's a difficult thing, but what and any answer, any estimate has to be looked at with considerable suspicion. But for what it's worth, I was rather surprised to see that the first cut by way of an answer was 2% per annum.
Out of
2 percentage points of China's 7% growth is indigenous innovation by Chinese. Now, maybe that number is off by quite a bit, but gee whiz, that's bigger than America's 1%.
Okay. I have lots more to ask, but I think it's time to let you guys do the talking. What I would like to impose one thing on you. Let's give a priority to questions that are about what we've been talking about here, about mass flourishing, about the ideas that Ned has been talking about. And if we have time, then we can get on to why the stock market's going to go up or something, okay? Somebody else is going to do the picking, right? Okay.
At the risk of asking a very politically tough question, I'm looking down your list of traditional and anti-modern values, and I'm just wondering, in your opinion, is the rapid rise of fundamentalism, I'm over here, the rapid rise of religious fundamentalism,
The what?
The rapid rise of religious fundamentalism. Now, I'm not talking about in the Muslim world, but I'm talking right here at home with the conservative movement. Is that at all related to this decline in innovation and going back to the more traditional and non-modern economy?
Put you on the spot, didn't he?
I resolved early in this work that my book and this thinking that my book reports that I wasn't going to get into religion because religion is a very complex thing, and there are many dimensions to every religion. So, I mean, it would have been a huge subject by itself. And but, you know, it's a fair question. What do you think about what do you think might be the influence of the rise of religious fundamentalism? It sort of looks like a traditional value, doesn't it?
Mm.
So one might think that it's a value that is kind of competing with that individualism and vitalism and quest for self-expression that I labeled modern. So that children of homes with fundamentalist religions wouldn't be thinking about doing some garage innovation next week. You might think that, but I don't know. We often find that people who belong to certain religions are very much caught up in business and
Ned, don't go on. I'll tell you why. Because the book, there's so much in the book, and there's so much stuff you've thought very carefully about. And this is blue sky time, right?
yeah.
Let's keep going.
I'm just speculating. Yeah.
Okay, we have a question in the center. Thank you very much for your very informative presentation. I appreciated it. Coming from another country, Canada, I remember that, at least in my day, when people innovated and were unsuccessful and went bankrupt, they were considered pariahs. I mean, bankruptcy was just the most horrible thing. And when I came to America, I discovered that losing out and having a second chance was a very, very important part of why people were prepared to innovate. They could lose and gain and lose and gain.
Yeah. Okay.
And along that same line, having read a few things about what's happening in China these days, if somebody
What's happening? What?
China.
Yeah.
You know, if someone does something very innovative and they lose, then they run away or they commit harry-carry or whatever. You know, it's not really it doesn't encourage people to be more innovative. So I'm wondering if you think that maybe the structures, the social structures and the judicial structures of America are one of the important reasons why people are prepared to innovate, because they can lose and then come back.
Yeah. Well, I do think that's true. I do think that America has it's an advantage of the American culture that it's okay to fail, and I don't know about Canada. That's interesting what you say. I do know though that there is a horror of failure in Italy, because in Italy, for example, if you have been allowed by society to start a firm, you got credit from the bank and so forth, then you are regarded as holding a public trust in your hands. And if you fail, you've let down the country. And so that is you're very stigmatized if your business fails. Is it the case that in China you're stigmatized, or you just feel bad? Of course, maybe that's the same thing, but anyway. But
I think you might get assassinated as well.
what? What'd you say?
You might get assassinated too. Let's continue.
We have a question in the middle. Thank you. I'm curious about that we've dropped about 50% in our creativity over the last few decades. What do we need to do to reverse that?
Well, of course, that's a way of talking. Our creativity is probably still there, but it's not being harnessed as before. Well, this question, of course, I wish it weren't there because it's such a hard question, and I hated even to address it in my book because I knew that I'd probably strike out. As Peter said in his introduction very well, I take the position that you can rationalize or optimize the tax structure all you want, and you can do you can adopt every policy prescription of all the right-thinking economists in the country, and at the end of the day, you may have increased efficiency quite a bit, but have you increased dynamism? Have you increased the desire and capacity and scope that society allows for innovation? And in most cases, I think there's a big question about that. I don't think that any of the standard policy proposals really go to innovation very directly and very powerfully. So I'm frustrated by the debate. Okay, now I continue to duck your question. Now let me try to answer it. Why don't we try to change those values? Why don't we make people understand that while a lot of these traditional values are very nice and it's understandable that we respect them and even admire them, but a lot of these traditional values have big social costs. It's not right of a family to put pressure on the kid to stay in the town or city where they live because, grandma needs some help and sis needs some help with her schooling and all that. That way of thinking is taken alone, looking at it, would be one of the many things that tend to freeze up the economy and tend to subdue the urge to innovate, and also, of course, if communities are opposed, if communities are intolerant or unappreciative of innovation, then that's going to cause potential innovators to think twice about attempting to make an innovation, because out of fear that for fear that the community won't allow the innovation in, and so I think if we don't change our thinking, if we don't realize that all these traditional values that have accreted over the past century or so, but I think especially since the 1960s, if we don't realize that all these traditional values that have come back and become so influential are having this big social cost, then we're not going to get very far. While if we do come to that awareness, if we do see that, hey, that's right, what we've got to celebrate is not so much the family, but exercising creativity and exploration and voyaging into the unknown and doing new things. If we start doing that, it'll be powerful, and we'll take off like a shot, just like the old days.
Hey, let's keep going.
Okay, we have a question in the back.
Dr. Phillips, thank you very much for your commentary tonight. It's very interesting. Could you address two questions? Number one, in a historical sense, give us more perspective in terms of countries that at one point in time were very dominant, like England, on an economic basis, and their demise, and how much the lack of innovation played a role in terms of that demise. In addition, Japan was going to take over the world economically, and it didn't happen. And could you address that as it relates to innovation? So that's the first question, historical. And then going
That's already two.
and then going forward, if you don't mind, go beyond China and tell us which 2 or 3 countries that you say have relatively high innovation relative to their.
Yeah. Well, there's so much there. About Britain, when I was in graduate school, I read a little bit about what they called the climacteric, the belief that it was believed that Britain had lost its mojo in the 1890s or the time of the Boer War or something like that, and that was that. But more recent economic historians have shown that this total factor productivity growth that I was talking about before, this growth of productivity not explained by the growth of capital per hour, per man hour worked, that was held up pretty well right through the 1930s. Britain's huge stumble, it's sinking into a state of very low innovation and low morale. That was in the years after World War II. And I think the same was, and then I think, well, that's Britain. Now you ask about
Japan Inc.
China and Japan and
Japan Inc.
and China.
In Japan in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah. What about Japan? Oh, by the way, about Britain. Britain became rather corporatist. You know, the British always had a soft spot for corporatism. Keynes was quite interested in what Mussolini was up to. Of course, this was before Mussolini became a terrible tyrant. But so when Mrs. Thatcher came into office, one of the first things she did was try to put an end to the ability of big corporations and big labor unions to run the country and run the economy. So Britain is complicated. It had dynamism, then it had corporatism. Mrs. Thatcher helped it to regain a bit of dynamism, but I think the jury is still out on how well that's going. With regard to Japan, certainly Japan was a highly corporatist economy as going way back, and I suppose that it did relatively well after World War II because, like Germany and France and Italy, it was engaging in technological transfers from the United States. So productivity in Japan was growing like crazy, as in Germany and France and Italy. And then at some point, the strings began to run out. The low-lying fruit that could be copied from the United States became scarcer and scarcer. And Japan hit that slowdown around, what was it, 1980?
It slowed in 80 and really fell apart in the 90s.
And it's quite interesting if you look on the back pages of the OECD Economic Outlook and you look at what's happened to productivity in the other countries I mentioned. France and Italy were going along pretty well until around 1998, when suddenly, I think it was in Italy, productivity growth dropped like a stone. And the next year, it dropped in France. And so I think all these countries simply ran out of the possibility of this, ran out of the rich possibilities of technological transfer about the same time.
There was one other point you were, would you, are there any, quickly, are there any economies right now that sparkle from the dynamism point of view?
Well, a lot of scholars find a lot of dynamism in Denmark, and in South Korea, the Samsung certainly has done quite a bit. I don't know whether Samsung is deeply creative. I don't think it's like Google, is it? And as I say, China's indigenous innovation is being hidden from view by the fact that it is still transferring a fair number of technologies from the United States, and something very important that I didn't have a chance to to mention before. There's something called technological diffusion. As a matter of fact, Richard Nelson and I might have invented that here at the RAND Corporation, but I don't remember exactly where we did it. And that is the rate at which a new technology travels from one firm to another, the rate at which the adoption of a new technology travels. And what's happening now in China is that the new technologies that were introduced, maybe of American origin originally, those new technologies which are now in the more sophisticated companies along the coast are now spreading over all of China. So you're getting a big growth of productivity, not from indigenous. So there's a big element of productivity growth that is neither indigenous innovation, nor is it technological transfer, nor is it current technological transfer from the United States. It's just the widening of technologies that were already transferred.
Last question, because we promised to get you out of here quite soon.
We have a question over here to the speaker's right, and I apologize. I know many of you have questions, so hopefully we'll be able to chat with our speaker when he's signing his books. I'm going to hand the microphone here and then hand it off to our introducer.
Thank you. Just a quick question. Is it that Americans and American companies are becoming less creative and less, they're creating less ingenuity? Or is it that American companies and American entrepreneurs are now realizing this creativity overseas? I mean, the U.S. has continually regulated business more. We have one of the highest corporate tax rates in the world. We're seeing more and more technologies that have been maybe developed by Americans, but it's a Hong Kong company going public in Hong Kong. And now the income from that is being realized in places like Singapore and Hong Kong. And how does that factor into things?
Well, maybe so. Maybe you're right in your conjecture that that's scaring off American corporations from attempting to innovate. But on the other hand, the idea of defensive innovation, I'm not sure what the support for that theory is, but the idea of defensive innovation would suggest that American corporations would be scared into attempts to innovate more for fear that if they don't, overseas companies will take their lunch from them.
Well, I think we've not come to an end, but we've come to a middle where we have to quit. I'd like to thank you, Ned. It was very interesting.
So thank you again for tonight's intriguing and informative discussion. The book, Mass Flourishing, will be available for sale outside this room by our friends, Barnes & Nobles of Santa Monica. Professor Phelps will be signing this book outside the room and may be able to answer the question that you never got to ask. Thank you again for coming. We look forward to seeing you at our next RAND event in 2014. Good evening.